The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the Carolina mist when Captain Thea Blackwell stepped through the main gate of Fort Bragg. 600 hours. The base was already alive with the organized chaos of America's premier special operations installation. Helicopters thundered overhead. Diesel engines growled from the motor pool. Somewhere in the distance, the sharp crack of rifle fire echoed from the ranges. Thea carried nothing but a small tactical backpack. No uniform, no visible credentials. Just black athletic gear that moved with her lean frame and a dark ponytail pulled tight against her skull. She moved like someone who understood that every step communicated information to anyone trained to read it. The gate guard had waved her through after a brief radio confirmation. Someone with serious clearance had arranged her access. But that information hadn't reached the training yard, where Master Sergeant Derek Hargrove ruled with the absolute authority of 20 years in Special Forces and a voice that could strip paint from walls. Hargrove spotted her immediately. 2 decades of combat had taught him to notice anything out of place, and this woman was definitely out of place. 5'6", maybe 130 soaking wet, moving toward his formation like she owned every inch of ground between the gate and his soldiers. He intercepted her before she could get within 50 feet of his men. "Hold it right there." Thea stopped. Her eyes swept across him once. A catalog of details absorbed in the space between heartbeats. 6'3", 240, early 40s, wedding ring worn to a dull shine. Right-handed from the way his hand rested near his sidearm, slight favor to his left knee, and an ego approximately the size of the state of Texas. "Is there a problem, Sergeant?" Hargrove's eyes narrowed. She'd identified his rank from the insignia on his PT uniform. That suggested some military familiarity, but her civilian clothes and unmarked presence told a different story entirely. "The problem is you're in a restricted area without authorization. This is Special Forces training ground, not a tourist attraction. I'm aware of what this is." "Then you're aware you need to leave." Hargrove stepped closer, using his height the way he'd learned to use it over the years, a technique of intimidation that worked on most people. "The gift shop is back that way, sweetheart. Maybe you can buy a nice t-shirt to remember your visit." Behind him, scattered laughter rippled through the formation. 156 soldiers watching. 156 witnesses to what Hargrove assumed would be her embarrassed retreat. Thea didn't retreat. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Sergeant." The laughter died. Something in her voice, a quality of absolute certainty. It cut through the morning air like a blade finding flesh. Hargrove felt his jaw tighten. In 2 decades of service, he'd faced down insurgents in 3 different countries, survived 4 IED attacks, earned every commendation the Army could pin on a man's chest. He didn't get challenged by civilians, especially not small women who looked like they should be teaching yoga somewhere in Chapel Hill. "Listen here, little girl. I don't know who you think you are, but on this base, I am the authority. These are my soldiers. This is my training ground. And you're about to find out what happens when civilians wander into places they don't belong." "Little girl?" Thea's voice remained steady, but something flickered behind her dark eyes. Something that should have warned Hargrove to reconsider his approach, to maybe think about why a woman who looked like she did would walk onto a Special Forces installation with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "That's an interesting choice of words, Sergeant." "It's an accurate choice of words. Now turn around and walk back the way you came before I have you escorted off this installation in handcuffs." From the formation, Sergeant First Class James Riker watched the confrontation with growing unease. Something about the woman's posture bothered him. The way she positioned herself, the way her weight stayed balanced on the balls of her feet, the way she never let Hargrove get directly behind her. He'd seen that positioning before. Kandahar. 3 years ago, when everything went to hell and his team should have died in a compound that became a killing box. "Sergeant Hargrove," Thea said, her tone dropping to something quieter but somehow more dangerous. I'm going to give you one opportunity to reconsider this conversation. I suggest you take it." Hargrove laughed, a loud, genuine laugh that carried across the training yard and drew more attention from the soldiers in formation. This was too good. This tiny woman was actually threatening him. One opportunity. He stepped even closer, close enough that his shadow fell across her face. "Here's your opportunity, sweetheart. Walk away right now and I won't file a federal trespassing charge. Stay here another 30 seconds and I guarantee you'll spend tonight in a holding cell explaining to federal marshals why you thought it was a good idea to infiltrate a military installation." Infiltrate. Thea repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "You think I'm infiltrating? I think you're either stupid or dangerous, maybe both. And which option are you hoping for?" The question stopped Hargrove cold, not because it was clever, but because of the way she asked it, like she genuinely wanted to know, like his answer would determine something important. "I'm hoping," he said slowly, "that you're smart enough to walk away before this gets ugly." Thea tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that reminded Riker of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Clinical, detached, already knowing what she would find. "It's already ugly, Sergeant. You just don't know it yet." Colonel Jennifer Matthews watched the confrontation from her office window, coffee growing cold in her hand. Her aide had alerted her to an unauthorized presence in the training area. She'd expected to see security police handling the situation. Instead, she saw Derek Hargrove doing what Derek Hargrove always did, establishing dominance through intimidation. Matthews had mixed feelings about Hargrove. The man was an exceptional trainer. His soldiers consistently outperformed other units. But his methods walked a fine line between tough love and outright harassment, and complaints had been piling up for months. "Ma'am," her aide said, entering the office, "I'm getting strange responses to our background check on the visitor." "Strange how?" "The system keeps redirecting to classified databases. I've never seen clearance requirements like this for a simple identity check." Matthews set down her coffee. "What level of classification?" "That's the thing, ma'am. It won't tell me. It just says the information is compartmentalized above my access." Above a captain's access. That meant serious clearance. The kind that flagged investigators at federal agencies and prompted phone calls from people whose names never appeared on organizational charts. "Keep trying," Matthews said, "and get me a secure line to base operations. Something about this doesn't feel right." On the training ground, the standoff continued. Hargrove had run out of patience. The woman refused to leave. She refused to identify herself. She refused to show fear. And his soldiers were watching, waiting to see how their master sergeant handled this unprecedented challenge to his authority. He couldn't back down, not in front of them, not without losing the respect he'd spent years building. "Last chance," he said, "walk away." Or what? The question hung between them like a live grenade. "Or I remove you myself." "You could try." Thea's voice carried no bravado, no theatrical confidence, just the quiet certainty of someone stating an objective fact. "You'd fail, but you could try." Staff Sergeant Vincent Cade chose that moment to join the confrontation. Cade was Hargrove's unofficial second-in-command, a man whose reputation for handling problems had made him valuable to people who didn't ask questions about methods. "Bull, what's going on here?" "Civilian trespasser," Hargrove said without taking his eyes off Thea. "Won't identify herself. Won't leave. Thinks she belongs here." Cade circled around to Thea's left side, positioning himself to cut off potential escape routes. It was a subtle movement, professional, the kind of coordination that came from years of working together. Thea noticed immediately. "Staff Sergeant," she said without turning to look at Cade, "if you're planning to flank me, you might want to be less obvious about it." She paused. "Also, your boot's untied." Cade glanced down automatically. His boot was fine, but the moment of distraction told Thea everything she needed to know about his training level and reaction time. "Cute," Cade said, his voice carrying an edge that went beyond professional annoyance. "You think you're clever? I think you both need to step back and let me do what I came here to do." "And what exactly did you come here to do?" Hargrove demanded. Thea smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. "I came to find out if the security at this installation is as compromised as the report suggested. So far, I'm not impressed." The word compromised hit Hargrove like a physical blow. Security was his responsibility. If someone was questioning the integrity of his installation, they were questioning him personally. "Who the hell are you?" he growled. "Someone who knows that your communications equipment has a frequency drift problem that makes it vulnerable to interception. Someone who knows that your perimeter sensors haven't been calibrated in 6 months. Someone who knows that 3 of your soldiers have clearance flags that should have been addressed weeks ago." Each statement landed with surgical precision. These weren't guesses. These were specific, accurate assessments of vulnerabilities that Hargrove himself had reported through official channels. Vulnerabilities that should have been classified. "How do you know that?" His voice had changed. The bravado was cracking, replaced by something that approached genuine concern. "How I know isn't important. What's important is that if I know, other people know too. People who don't have the best interests of this installation in mind." Riker stepped forward from the formation, unable to stay silent any longer. "Sergeant Hargrove, permission to speak." "Not now, Riker." "Sir, with respect, this is important. I think I know who she is." That got Hargrove's attention. "You know her?" Riker hesitated. What he was about to say would violate operational security protocols. But what he'd witnessed in Kandahar had taught him that some protocols mattered less than doing the right thing. "Not personally, sir, but I've seen her work. Or at least I've seen someone who moves exactly like her." He looked at Thea. "Kandahar, 2021, the compound extraction." Thea's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition. And something else. Caution. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sergeant." "Yes, you do." Riker's voice carried the weight of memory, of a night that had almost ended with 3 body bags going home to families who would never understand why. "My team was pinned down in a compound, 3 of us wounded, including me. Our comms were dead. We were 12 hours from the nearest support. The Taliban knew exactly where we were, and they were coming." The training yard had gone silent. 156 soldiers listening to a story that most of them had never heard. A story that Riker had been ordered never to tell. Then someone appeared out of nowhere. A woman, small, dark ponytail, moved like a ghost through that compound. I watched her from my position. Couldn't believe what I was seeing. He paused, the memory still sharp enough to cut. 12 hostiles, 8 minutes. Every single one of them dropped with a headshot. HK 416 with a suppressor. She moved through that compound like she could see in the dark, like she knew where every target was before they knew she was there. Thea remained perfectly still, listening, calculating how much this revelation would change the dynamics of what came next. She called in extraction on a frequency we didn't even know existed, secured our perimeter until the helicopters arrived, then disappeared before we could thank her, before we could even get her name. Riker looked directly at Thea. 3 of my brothers came home because of her. We never got to thank her, never got to tell her what it meant. But I've never forgotten how she moved, how she positioned herself, how she seemed to know exactly where every threat was before the threat knew she was there. He straightened. "That was you. I'd bet my life on it." Hargrove's certainty wavered for the first time. Riker was one of his best soldiers, steady, reliable, not prone to fantasy or exaggeration. If Riker believed this woman had saved his team in some classified operation, there might be more to her than met the eye. But pride is a powerful drug, and Hargrove had taken too much of it to stop now. "I don't care who she might have been," he said. "Right now she's an unauthorized civilian in a restricted area, and she's going to leave, one way or another. Staff Sergeant Cade, he said without looking away from Thea, want me to handle this? I want you to stand by. If she doesn't start walking in the next 10 seconds, we'll escort her out together. Thea made a small sound, almost disappointed, like a teacher watching a student fail a test they should have passed easily. Sergeant Hargrove, you're about to make a very significant mistake. The only mistake here is you thinking you can walk onto my base and tell me how to do my job. I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm telling you that you're not doing your job. There's a difference. That's it. Hargrove reached for her arm, intending to physically remove her from his training ground, to reassert his authority in front of his men. His hand never reached her. Thea moved with a fluidity that seemed to bend the laws of physics. One moment she was standing still, the next she had shifted her weight, redirected his momentum, guided him past her with a technique so clean it looked almost accidental. Hargrove stumbled forward, catching himself before he fell, his face flushed crimson with embarrassment and rage. What the hell was that? A suggestion, Thea said calmly. Don't touch me. Cade stepped forward, his posture shifting from observation to engagement. Lady, you just assaulted a senior NCO. That's a federal offense. I redirected his movement. There's a difference. He's not injured. He's not incapacitated. He's just embarrassed. Embarrassed? Hargrove's voice rose to a dangerous volume. You think I'm embarrassed? I think you're humiliated. I think you're angry. And I think you're about to do something that will end your career. My career is fine. Your career is 3 minutes away from being a cautionary tale. You can still walk away from this. Pretend it never happened. Go back to training your soldiers. I'll finish my assessment and file my report. And nobody needs to know that you spent 15 minutes trying to intimidate a federal evaluator. Federal evaluator. The words landed like bombs. You're not a federal evaluator, Hargrove said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Federal evaluators carry credentials. They announce themselves. They don't sneak onto bases in workout clothes. The best evaluations are the ones nobody knows are happening. That's the whole point. Colonel Matthews appeared at the edge of the training area, drawn by reports of the confrontation. She took in the scene with a quick assessment of a career officer. Hargrove and Cade squared off against an unknown woman, Riker looking like he'd seen a ghost, and 156 soldiers watching something that was definitely not part of the training schedule. What's going on here? Ma'am, Hargrove said, straightening slightly, we have an unauthorized civilian who refuses to identify herself or leave the premises. I'm not unauthorized, Thea said. I was cleared through the main gate by specific arrangement. Matthews frowned. What arrangement? I wasn't informed of any visitors today. The arrangement was made above your level, Colonel. I apologize for the lack of coordination. But compartmentalization was necessary for the accuracy of the assessment. Assessment of what? Security protocols, response procedures, command structure integrity. Thea paused. So far, the results are not encouraging. Matthews felt her stomach tighten. She'd heard about these evaluations. Unannounced inspections by personnel whose authority came from places so high up the chain that arguing was pointless. If this woman was what she claimed to be, Hargrove had just created an incident that would generate paperwork for months. Do you have any identification? I have identification that will verify my authorization, but showing it here in front of all these soldiers would defeat the purpose of the evaluation. Then show me privately. I prefer to complete my observation first, unless your sergeants here make that impossible. Hargrove stepped forward. Ma'am, with respect, this is obviously some kind of con. No federal evaluator would operate like this. She's probably a foreign agent or a journalist trying to gather intelligence on our operations. Foreign agent? Thea's voice carried a hint of amusement. That's quite a promotion from yoga instructor. This isn't funny. No, it isn't, but it is revealing. She turned to Matthews. Colonel, your master sergeant has spent the last 15 minutes demonstrating exactly the kind of assumptions and biases that compromise operational security. He saw a small woman in civilian clothes and immediately categorized her as either a threat to be neutralized or a nuisance to be dismissed. It never occurred to him that she might be someone with legitimate authority. Matthews looked at Hargrove, saw the truth of it in his face. Is that accurate, Sergeant? Ma'am, I was following standard protocols for unauthorized civilians in restricted areas. Standard protocols include calling security, verifying identification through proper channels, maintaining professional demeanor. Your sergeant chose intimidation, insults, and physical confrontation. The accuracy of the assessment made Matthews wince. She'd seen Hargrove's approach. She knew it wasn't professional, but calling it out in front of the soldiers would undermine unit cohesion and command authority. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office. Perhaps we should, Thea agreed. But first, I need to document one more observation. What observation? Thea turned to face Cade, who had been slowly positioning himself behind her during the conversation. Staff Sergeant Cade, would you like to explain why you've been signaling to 3 soldiers in the formation to prepare for coordinated action? Cade froze. How had she seen that? He'd been careful, using hand signals that only his people would recognize. I don't know what you're talking about. Corporal Davis, Lance Corporal Murphy, Private First Class Thompson. Thea didn't turn to look at them. All 3 have shifted their weight to their front feet. All 3 are waiting for your command. I'm guessing the plan is to surround me and assist with my escort off the base. Riker's blood ran cold. He knew Cade's reputation, knew the things that happened to people who embarrassed him. If Cade had planned what Thea was suggesting, that's a serious accusation, Matthews said. It's a serious situation, but I'm willing to let it go if everyone takes a step back and allows me to complete my work without further interference. Cade's jaw tightened. Nobody had ever read him so easily. Nobody had ever anticipated his moves before he made them. This woman was either incredibly perceptive or had access to information she shouldn't have. Either way, she was dangerous. The radio on Matthews' belt crackled. Colonel Matthews, this is base operations. We're getting federal flags on your background check request. The subject's file is classified at levels requiring flag officer authorization. I'm being redirected to databases I don't have clearance to access. 156 soldiers heard the transmission. 156 soldiers watched as the color drained from Hargrove's face. As Cade's confident posture suddenly became very still. Copy that, operations. Stand by. Matthews looked at Thea with new eyes. Flag officer authorization meant generals and admirals. It meant security clearances that existed above top secret. It meant someone whose identity was protected by the highest levels of government. Perhaps, she said slowly, we should definitely continue this in my office. Perhaps we should. Thea started walking toward the administrative building, then paused, turned back to face Hargrove one last time. The morning sun caught her face, illuminating features that had seen things most soldiers never would, survived things most soldiers never could. When you laughed at my rank, Sergeant Hargrove, you laughed at someone who earned captain's bars in places that don't appear on any map. Someone who has led missions that officially never happened. Someone who has eliminated more enemies of this country than you have soldiers in your formation. Hargrove opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. But the rank isn't what should concern you. What should concern you is this. I came here to evaluate security. I found something much worse. She let that hang in the air for a moment. And before this day is over, everyone is going to understand exactly how dangerous it is to underestimate the quiet ones. She walked toward Matthew's office without looking back. Behind her, 156 soldiers stood in stunned silence. And Staff Sergeant Vincent Cade pulled his phone from his pocket, fingers moving quickly across the screen, sending an encrypted message to a number he'd memorized but never saved. Problem: federal heat, Need guidance. The response came in seconds. Contain or eliminate. Your choice. No traces. Cade smiled. He'd always preferred direct solutions. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Thea's phone had buzzed in her pocket the moment Cade sent his message. An encrypted alert that told her everything she needed to know. Unauthorized transmission detected. Origin, 47 meters northwest of your position. Destination, known foreign intelligence cutout flagged by DIA 6 months ago. She didn't break stride, didn't react, just kept walking toward Matthews's office while her mind cataloged the information and began planning her next move. The leak had just identified himself. Now came the hard part, proving it. Colonel Matthews closed her office door and turned to face Thea with the expression of someone who had just realized they were standing on a landmine. The Venetian blinds cast striped shadows across her desk. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Fort Bragg. Inside, the temperature felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. "Captain," Matthews said carefully, "I need to understand exactly what's happening here." Thea set her backpack down beside one of the visitor chairs, but remained standing. Her posture relaxed but alert. The same positioning Matthews had noticed on the training ground. Weight balanced, eyes tracking movement, never letting anyone get behind her completely. "What's happening is that your installation has a serious problem, Colonel, and I'm not talking about security protocols." Matthews gestured toward a chair. Thea shook her head slightly, preferred to stand. Matthews had seen that before. Combat veterans who'd learned that sitting made you vulnerable, made you slow, made you dead. "The background check flagged your file at levels I've never seen before. Flag officer authorization. That's general level clearance. Who exactly are you?" "I'm someone who was sent to evaluate whether Fort Bragg's security infrastructure is adequate for the operations being planned through this facility." Thea's voice remained level, professional, but there was steel underneath. "My preliminary assessment is that it isn't." "Based on what? A 15-minute confrontation with one of my NCOs?" "Based on the fact that I walked onto this base with nothing but a phone call from Washington. Based on the fact that your master sergeant spent those 15 minutes demonstrating exactly the kind of assumption-based thinking that gets soldiers killed. And based on something else entirely." Matthews waited. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. "There's a leak in your command structure, Colonel. Someone at Fort Bragg has been selling information to foreign interests for at least 18 months. The words hit Matthews like a physical blow. She sat down heavily in her chair, the implications cascading through her mind like dominoes falling in slow motion. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a confirmed intelligence finding. The Defense Intelligence Agency has been tracking the leak for 6 months. We know the information is coming from this installation. We know it involves operational planning data that could compromise ongoing missions. What we don't know is who." Matthews felt her hands grip the armrests of her chair. 23 years of service, 3 combat deployments, a spotless record. And now someone in her command was selling secrets to enemies of the United States. "And you think you can identify the source by walking around in workout clothes and picking fights with my sergeants?" "I think the source will identify themselves by how they react to my presence." Thea finally sat down. But even seated, she maintained that same alertness, that same readiness. Guilty people behave differently than innocent people when they feel threatened. Your Sergeant Hargrove is arrogant and biased, but he's not the leak. His reactions were too genuine, too predictable. "Then who?" "I have a theory, but I need more time to confirm it." Thea pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen showed an encrypted message alert, time-stamped 3 minutes ago. She turned it so Matthews could see. "This was sent from somewhere on your training ground approximately 90 seconds after you requested my background check. It went to a cutout in Alexandria that the DIA compromised 6 months ago. We've been monitoring it, waiting to see who uses it." Matthews stared at the alert, her mind racing through the personnel who'd been present. 156 soldiers, plus Hargrove, plus Cade, plus a dozen support staff scattered around the area. Can you trace it to a specific person? We can narrow it to a radius, approximately 50 meters. That includes most of your senior NCOs. Cade. Matthews said the name before she could stop herself. Thea's eyes sharpened. Interested. Why him? I don't know. Instinct. Something about the way he positioned himself during your confrontation. The way he was signaling to those three soldiers. And he's been... She trailed off, not wanting to make unfounded accusations. But Thea's expression told her to continue. He's been different the past few weeks. Nervous. Making phone calls he thinks nobody notices. Checking his surroundings more than usual. How long has he been at Fort Bragg? 7 years. Exemplary record. Multiple combat deployments. Decorations for valor. If he's the lead colonel, I don't know how we missed it. Thea leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something quieter but more intense. You missed it because people like him are very good at appearing normal, at maintaining the facade. They're recruited specifically because they can pass scrutiny, because nobody would suspect them. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the training ground where Hargrove was dismissing the formation. Staff Sergeant Vincent Cade was recruited 6 years ago during his deployment to Afghanistan. A disciplinary incident threatened his career, made him vulnerable. That's when they approached him. Matthews felt ice water run through her veins. How do you know that? Because the pattern matches other cases we've investigated. The timeline, the methodology, the gradual escalation from small compromises to major breaches. Thea turned back from the window. At first, he sold small things. Patrol schedules, equipment manifests, nothing that seemed particularly dangerous. But small things became bigger things. Her voice hardened. We believe Staff Sergeant Cade is responsible for at least 20 American deaths over the past 6 years. Not through direct action, through sabotage, through intelligence gaps, through equipment failures that he arranged. 20 soldiers whose families were told they died in combat, when the real enemy was standing right beside them, wearing the same uniform. Can you prove this? Not yet, but I will. Today. Thea checked her phone again. Another encrypted alert, this one different. Kay just sent a second message. He's escalating, getting instructions from his handlers about how to deal with me. What kind of instructions? Thea met Matthews's eyes. No hesitation, no fear. Just cold assessment of the tactical situation. The kind that end with a body bag and an official story about a tragic accident during a training evaluation. Matthews reached for her radio, but Thea's hand shot out, stopped her. Don't. If we alert him now, he'll destroy evidence and activate contingency plans. His handlers will disappear. The network will go dormant, and we'll never know the full extent of the damage. So what do you want me to do? Continue the training schedule as planned. I'll participate as an observer. Let Cade think I'm just another federal bureaucrat checking boxes. Let him think he still has time to plan, to coordinate with his people. And if he tries something? Thea smiled. It was the same expression she'd given Hargrove on the training ground. Not friendly, not warm, just absolutely certain. Then we'll have our answer, won't we? The physical fitness evaluation began 30 minutes later. Master Sergeant Hargrove had regained enough composure to maintain professional demeanor. But his eyes tracked Thea's every movement with barely concealed hostility mixed with something that might have been respect. He'd spent the past 20 minutes researching what little he could find about federal security evaluations, learning that they were real, that they happened, that they could end careers if the evaluator's report was sufficiently damning. The formation had reassembled on the PT field. 156 soldiers standing in neat ranks, waiting for the day's evolution. Hargrove stood at the front, Cade beside him, both men projecting the absolute confidence that came with years of breaking recruits and forging operators. Thea stood off to the side, close enough to observe, far enough to stay out of the way. She'd changed nothing about her appearance, still wore the same black athletic gear, still had her hair pulled back in that same tight ponytail. But something had shifted in the way the soldiers looked at her. Word had spread about Riker's story, about Kandahar, about 12 kills in 8 minutes. Rumor had a way of traveling faster than official communications in the military, and by now, everyone knew that the small woman in workout clothes might be considerably more than she appeared. Q-Course fitness test, Hargrove announced to the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying across the field with practiced authority. 5-mile run, maximum pull-ups, 500-meter combat swim with full gear. He turned to look at Thea, the challenge obvious in his posture. Since our visitor wants to observe training, she's welcome to participate, if she thinks she can handle it. Thea stepped forward, separated herself from the observation area, walked to where Hargrove stood with the same unhurried confidence she'd shown walking onto the base. "I accept." Murmurs rippled through the formation. Riker watched with growing concern. He'd seen what she could do in combat, but the Q course was a different kind of test. It broke men who had trained for years, men who outweighed her by 80 pounds of muscle, men who lived for this kind of challenge. "Ma'am," Riker said quietly, stepping close enough to speak without being overheard by the full formation. "You don't have to prove anything to these people." Thea looked at him, really looked at him, and Riker saw something in her eyes that reminded him of that night in Kandahar, when she'd appeared out of darkness like an avenging angel, when she'd moved through that compound with the absolute certainty of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "I'm not proving anything to them, Sergeant. I'm proving something to myself." The run began at a brutal pace. Hargrove set the speed personally, pushing harder than standard protocol allowed, trying to break her in the first mile, trying to prove that whatever she'd done in Kandahar, she wasn't prepared for this. Within the first mile, soldiers started falling back, unable to maintain the tempo. The formation stretched out along the tree-lined trail that wound through Fort Bragg's training areas. Morning sun burning through the last of the mist, temperature climbing toward the Carolina heat that would dominate the afternoon. Thea stayed with the lead group, her stride efficient, economical, the product of thousands of miles logged in conditions far worse than North Carolina humidity. She didn't fight the pace, she absorbed it. Let it become part of her rhythm. Let her body remember all the times it had carried her through situations where stopping meant dying. Mile 2. The lead group had shrunk to 20 soldiers, all of them breathing hard, all of them starting to feel the burn in their legs. The question creeping into their minds about whether they could maintain this for another 3 miles. Thea's breathing remained steady, controlled. She'd learned a long time ago that running wasn't about leg strength, it was about mental discipline, about accepting pain as information rather than a command to stop. Mile 3. Hargrove glanced back, expecting to see her struggling, falling behind, proving that her earlier performance had been luck or adrenaline or some kind of trick. She was 3 steps behind him, eyes focused on the trail ahead. No visible strain, no panic, just steady, forward progress. Mile 4. The lead group had shrunk to 12 soldiers, every one of them fighting for breath, legs burning, lungs screaming for relief. This was the point where mental toughness separated the elite from the merely good, where the body begged to quit and the mind had to force it to continue. Thea moved to the front, not dramatically, not showboating. She simply increased her pace by a fraction. Let momentum carry her past the struggling soldiers until she was running alone at the head of the formation. Hargrove watched her pull away and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Doubt. Real doubt about his own capabilities, about his assumptions, about everything he thought he knew. She crossed the finish line at 32 minutes and 47 seconds, nearly a full minute ahead of the second-place finisher, a time that would qualify her for the most elite special operations units in the military. The pull-up station waited, a simple bar mounted between two posts, a test of upper body strength and endurance that had broken countless candidates over the years. Hargrove approached it with grim determination. He would not be shown up on his own training ground, not by anyone. Thea approached the bar without hesitation. Her hands gripped the metal with familiar precision, chalk dust from previous candidates still coating the surface. She took a breath, centered herself, and began to pull. 1, 2, 3. Her form was perfect. Full extension at the bottom, chin clearly above the bar at the top. No kipping, no swinging, no momentum tricks. Just pure strength translated into controlled movement. 10, 11, 12. Soldiers gathered to watch. This wasn't normal. Civilians didn't perform like this. Even most soldiers didn't perform like this. Pull-ups were a young man's exercise, a test of upper body power that favored size and strength. 18, 19, 20. Hargrove's certainty crumbled with each repetition. Everything he'd assumed about this woman was wrong. Everything he'd said, every insult, every dismissive comment, all of it coming back to haunt him like ghosts from a past he couldn't escape. 25, 26, 27. Thea's breathing remained controlled, her movements still precise. She'd done this before. Done it in selection courses that made the Q course look like basic training. Done it while carrying the weight of missions that officially didn't exist. 28. She dropped from the bar, not because she was exhausted, but because she'd made her point. Because pushing to failure would have been showing off, and showing off wasn't her style. Combat swim, she said, looking directly at Hargrove. Unless you'd like to concede. Hargrove's jaw tightened. The pool is this way. The combat swim was designed to simulate the conditions of an amphibious infiltration. Full battle dress uniform, 50 pounds of equipment, 500 meters in water cold enough to induce hypothermia if you stayed in too long. Most candidates feared this portion more than any other. Drowning was a real possibility if technique failed or panic set in. Thea entered the water like she was coming home. Her stroke was the modified combat side stroke, the technique taught to Navy SEALs and Marine Raiders for long-distance swims with equipment. Each movement precise, conserving energy while maintaining forward progress, using the water rather than fighting it. The 50 pounds of gear tried to drag her down, tried to exhaust her arms and shoulders, tried to fill her lungs with water when she turned her head to breathe. But she'd done this before too. Done it in selection courses that tested whether you had the discipline to stay calm when your body screamed for air. When every instinct demanded that you surface and breathe and survive. She completed the 500 meters in 10 minutes and 58 seconds. When she climbed out of the pool, water streaming from her uniform and equipment, 156 soldiers stood in absolute silence. This wasn't evaluation. This was demonstration. This was a masterclass in what the human body could accomplish when properly trained, when disciplined, when forged in fires that most people would never experience. Hargrove approached slowly, his expression unreadable, a mix of emotions playing across his face too complex to catalog. Respect, embarrassment, anger at himself, grudging admiration for someone who had just proven everything he'd assumed was wrong. Captain Blackwell, he said, using her rank for the first time, speaking it like an apology. Where exactly did you serve? Places that don't appear on maps, Sergeant, doing things that don't appear in reports. Kandahar, among others? Thea wrung water from her hair, taking her time with the answer, considering how much to reveal. How much these soldiers needed to know. Afghanistan, 3 tours, different capacity than you're imagining. What capacity? The capacity where you don't wear a uniform because uniforms make you a target, where you don't have backup because backup would compromise the mission, where you succeed completely or you disappear completely and nobody ever knows which one happened. Riker stepped forward, unable to stay silent. Sergeant Hargrove, I tried to tell you earlier. I've seen her work. My team is alive because of someone who operates exactly like she does. Hargrove looked at Riker, then back at Thea, then at the ground. For a long moment he said nothing, the weight of his earlier words hanging between them like smoke from a fire that refused to die. I owe you an apology, ma'am. You owe me nothing, Sergeant, but you owe yourself some reflection on why you assumed a woman in civilian clothes couldn't possibly be someone worth respecting. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen a lot of people try to talk their way onto this base for various reasons. Most of them are exactly what they appear to be. And sometimes they're not. The question is whether you can tell the difference before it's too late. Staff Sergeant Cade watched the exchange from the edge of the training area, his phone heavy in his pocket. The response from his handlers had been clear, crystal clear. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Contain or eliminate, your choice. No traces. Containing was no longer an option. This woman was too capable, too connected, too dangerous to simply discredit or delay. That left elimination. Kate had done wet work before, not officially, not on American soil, but the skills didn't care about geography. The training didn't discriminate based on location. A target was a target, and this target had just proven herself to be a significant threat to everything he'd built over the past 6 years. A training accident, equipment malfunction, a moment of confusion that ended with a regrettable casualty. These things happen sometimes, even at professional installations, even with experienced personnel. He began planning. The supply building was isolated, soundproofed for weapons testing, security cameras that he knew how to disable, and a woman who, despite her impressive physical performance, was still just one person against whatever force he chose to bring. He signaled to Corporal Davis, Lance Corporal Murphy, Private First Class Thompson, the 3 soldiers who owed him favors, the 3 soldiers who had learned not to ask questions about the tasks he assigned them. Meet me at the supply building in 30 minutes, he said quietly, voice low enough that only they could hear. We have a situation that needs handling. Davis hesitated, the same Davis who had shifted his weight during the earlier confrontation. The same Davis who Thea had identified as ready to follow Cade's command. What kind of situation, Staff Sergeant? The kind that doesn't get discussed in the open. The kind that keeps this unit safe from outside interference. Cade let that sink in. Let them remember all the times he'd protected them, all the times he'd made problems disappear, all the times he'd stood between them and consequences that could have ended their careers. Are you in or not? The 3 soldiers exchanged glances. They'd followed Cade's orders before, handled situations that never appeared in official reports. This felt different, more serious. But Cade had never steered them wrong. We're in, Davis said. Good. Remember, this is about protecting the unit. Whatever happens, we're doing the right thing. Thea caught Cade's signal from across the training yard. She'd been watching him since the unauthorized transmission, cataloging his movements, his communications, his interactions with other soldiers, building a profile, constructing a picture of who he was and what he was capable of. He was the leak. She was almost certain now. The transmission timing, the nervous energy beneath the professional exterior, the way he'd positioned himself during the confrontation, all of it pointed to someone with something to hide, something worth protecting, something worth killing for. But almost certain wasn't enough for a conviction, wasn't enough to justify what came next. She needed proof, hard evidence that would stand up to legal scrutiny, evidence that would expose not just Cade, but whoever he was working for. That meant letting him make his move. Colonel Matthews appeared at the edge of the training area, her face tight with concern. She'd been monitoring the situation from her office, watching through windows and receiving reports from her staff, and she didn't like what she was seeing. "Captain Blackwell," she said quietly, approaching close enough to speak without being overheard by the formation. "I need you to trust me for the next hour." "Trust you? How?" "Staff Sergeant Cade is planning something. I don't know exactly what, but it involves the supply building and 3 of his soldiers." Matthew's voice carried the weight of command responsibility, of knowing that something was wrong, but not knowing how to stop it without making things worse. "How do you know?" "Because I've been watching him the same way you have, and because I've seen that pattern before. The isolated location, the trusted subordinates, the careful timing. He's preparing for something that can't happen in the open." Thea considered this. Matthews was sharp, sharper than she'd initially assessed. The colonel had been paying attention, had been processing the same information, had come to similar conclusions. "What do you want me to do?" "Don't go to that supply building alone. Wait for backup. Let me coordinate a response team. We can catch him in the act without putting you at risk." "Colonel, if I go in with backup, Cade will know something's wrong. He'll abort, destroy evidence, and we'll lose our chance to expose the full extent of his network." "And if you go in alone?" Thea met Matthew's eyes. No hesitation, no fear, just the same cold calculation she'd shown since walking through the gate that morning. "Then we find out exactly who he's working for and what they're planning. Because a man like Cade doesn't work alone. He has handlers, contacts, instructions, and when he thinks he's eliminating a threat, he'll communicate with them, he'll coordinate, and we'll capture all of it." "You're talking about using yourself as bait." "I'm talking about finishing the mission I came here to complete." Matthews struggled with the decision. Everything in her training told her this was wrong, dangerous, potentially catastrophic. But everything in her instincts told her this woman knew exactly what she was doing. 90 minutes, she said finally, not a second more. If you don't signal by then, I'm sending rapid response whether you want it or not. That's all I'll need, Colonel. Thea walked toward the supply building alone, her senses heightened to combat awareness. Every shadow a potential threat, every sound potentially significant, every step bringing her closer to a confrontation that would either expose the conspiracy or end her career, end her life. The supply building sat at the edge of the main training complex. Concrete block construction, small windows set high in the walls, a single entrance facing the parking area, and a back exit that led to a loading dock where vehicles could pull up without being observed from the main roads. Perfect for privacy, perfect for deniability, perfect for making someone disappear. Cade watched her approach from inside the building. He disabled the primary cameras using maintenance codes he'd acquired over years of careful planning, activated signal jamming equipment that would prevent any electronic communications from reaching outside the building. Whatever happened in the next few minutes would leave no electronic traces. Davis, Murphy, Thompson, they stood ready, all three holding weapons, all three committed to following Cade's lead, all three believing they were protecting their unit from a federal threat. "She's coming," Cade told them, his voice calm, professional, the same voice he'd used to give orders 1,000 times before. "Remember, she's a foreign agent who infiltrated this base to gather intelligence. We're protecting national security. Anything we do is justified by the threat she represents." "Are you sure about this?" Murphy asked, doubt creeping into his voice despite his earlier commitment. "I'm sure that if we don't handle this now, she'll destroy everything we built here, everything we've worked for. Is that what you want?" Murphy shook his head. The logic was clear, the necessity obvious, and Cade's authority absolute. "Then follow my lead, and remember, this never happened." Thea pushed open the supply building door and stepped into darkness. The door slammed shut behind her, automatic locks engaging with a mechanical click that echoed through the empty space. Vincent Cade's voice came from somewhere in the shadows, calm, almost friendly, like he was greeting an old colleague rather than preparing to kill a federal agent. "Welcome, Captain Blackwell. I've been looking forward to this conversation." Thea's eyes adjusted to the darkness within seconds, training kicking in before conscious thought could interfere. Catalog the space, identify the threats, calculate distances and angles, plan 3 moves ahead while appearing to react to the present. Cade stood 15 feet ahead, his service weapon drawn but not yet aimed, maintaining the pretense of professional authority even as he prepared for murder. The 3 soldiers flanked her position, cutting off the exit she just walked through. Davis to her left, Murphy to her right, Thompson directly behind her near the door. Standard ambush positioning, but sloppy. They'd assume she wouldn't recognize it, wouldn't anticipate it, wouldn't have already planned her response before stepping through that door. "Staff Sergeant Cade," she said, her voice carrying no trace of fear, no hint of the adrenaline flooding her system, just the same calm professionalism she'd maintained since walking onto Fort Bragg. "I was wondering when you'd make your move." You knew. Not a question, a statement. Cade's tactical mind processing this new information, recalculating odds that had seemed certain moments before. "I've known since you sent that transmission outside Colonel Matthews' office. Sloppy tradecraft, by the way. Your handlers should have taught you better." Cade's expression flickered, anger mixing with something that might have been admiration. She'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time, and he was just now realizing it. "You tracked my communication." "I tracked everything. The encrypted messages to your cutout in Alexandria. The offshore account in the Cayman Islands where you've deposited $217,000 over the past 18 months. The classified documents you photographed and transmitted through a dead-drop system that the DIA compromised 6 months ago." The 3 soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't what Cade had told them. Foreign agent, intelligence threat, national security. She was painting a very different picture. "She's lying," Cade said quickly, his voice sharp with the urgency of a man watching his story unravel. "This is exactly what foreign operatives do. They create false narratives to confuse and divide." "Corporal Davis," Thea said, not taking her eyes off Cade, her peripheral vision tracking all 3 soldiers simultaneously. "Ask yourself why your staff sergeant brought you to an isolated building with disabled cameras and jammed communications. Ask yourself what kind of legitimate military operation requires that level of secrecy from your own command structure." Davis's grip on his weapon wavered, the question cutting through the certainty Cade had instilled, making him think, making him doubt. "Staff Sergeant, maybe we should verify her story through proper channels." "There's no time for proper channels. She's already compromised our communications. If we don't neutralize her now, she'll transmit everything she knows to her handlers. Everything about our operations, our personnel, our vulnerabilities." "My handlers are the Defense Intelligence Agency," Thea said, her voice steady as stone. "My authorization comes from the Secretary of Defense." But his voice had lost its certainty, the authority draining away like water through cupped hands. 7 American assets dead in the past 18 months. Tehran, Beijing, Moscow, Kandahar, Damascus, Islamabad, all because someone at this installation sold classified. His voice younger than the others, less certain. "Why the secrecy? Why disable the cameras?" Cade's facade cracked, the careful construction of lies and misdirection showing fractures under the pressure of questions he couldn't answer without revealing the truth. "Because I was trying to protect this unit from federal interference. Because outsiders don't understand how we operate. Because sometimes you have to break rules to protect what matters." "What matters to you," Thea said, "is the $250,000 sitting in your offshore account. What matters to you is avoiding the federal prison sentence that's waiting when this investigation concludes. What matters to you is eliminating me before I can testify about what I've found." Cade raised his weapon. The barrel pointed directly at Thea's chest. No more pretense, no more professional courtesy, just the raw calculation of a man with nothing left to lose. "Staff Sergeant, don't!" Davis stepped forward, positioning himself between Cade and Thea. "Whatever she is, whatever she knows, we can't just murder a federal agent. She's not a federal agent. She's a threat. She passed every test we threw at her. She knew about Kandahar. She knew about classified operations that even we don't have clearance for. What if she's telling the truth?" The question hung in the air. What if? Two words that changed everything. Two words that made the difference between following orders and committing murder. Cade's answer came in the form of action rather than words. He swung his weapon toward Davis, the barrel tracking from Thea to the soldier who had dared to question him. The soldier who had chosen conscience over obedience. Thea moved. 4.2 seconds. That's how long it took to disarm a trained soldier who wasn't expecting resistance from the person he thought he'd trapped. 4.2 seconds that would later be analyzed, frame by frame, in the investigation that followed. 4.2 seconds that represented thousands of hours of training compressed into perfect execution. 0.0 seconds. Cade's finger began to squeeze the trigger, his brain sending the signal to the muscles that would fire the weapon. That would end Davis's life and eliminate the witness who'd seen too much. 0.7 seconds. Thea closed the distance, 12 feet of empty space disappearing like it had never existed. Her body moving with explosive speed that defied her size. That made physics seem like a suggestion rather than a law. 1.4 seconds. Her left hand struck Cade's weapon, not grabbing for it, not trying to control it, just redirecting the barrel away from Davis, away from the killing shot. A precise strike to the slide that changed the geometry of death. 2.6 seconds. Her right hand found the radial nerve cluster in Cade's forearm, the exact spot where nerve endings bunched together beneath skin and muscle, where a strike with proper force and angle could override the brain's control of the hand, could make fingers open whether they wanted to or not. 3.8 seconds. The weapon left Cade's grip. Thea caught it before it hit the ground. Magazine ejected with a practiced motion. Round cleared from the chamber. The mechanical actions so smooth they seemed choreographed. 4.2 seconds. Cade was face down on the concrete floor, his arm hyperextended behind his back, held in a joint lock that would dislocate his shoulder if he struggled, held with exactly the amount of force necessary to control without causing permanent damage. Murphy breathed out in a long exhale that might have been a prayer. Holy God, what just happened? What happened? Thea said, maintaining pressure on Cade's arm. Is that your staff sergeant attempted to murder a federal asset and failed. What happens next depends on whether you three want to be accomplices to treason or witnesses to justice. Davis made his decision instantly. He pointed his weapon at Cade's prone form. Not at Thea, not at the person he'd been told was the threat, but at the man who had just tried to kill him for asking questions. "Ma'am, we had no idea. He told us you were a foreign operative. He said we were protecting national security." "I know what he told you. I also know that you hesitated when things didn't add up. That hesitation might be the only thing that saves your careers." Cade struggled against her grip, testing the limits of the lock, finding only pain waiting at the edges of movement. "You can't prove anything. My communications are encrypted. My accounts are protected. This is your word against mine." "Actually," Thea said, pulling a small device from her pocket with her free hand, "it's your word against the evidence I've been collecting for the past 6 months." She held up what looked like a standard phone, but the screen showed waveforms and data streams that had nothing to do with civilian communications. "This is a military-grade recording unit. Everything that happened in this building from the moment you admitted to the offshore accounts until now has been transmitted to a secure server at DIA headquarters. Your threats, your confession, your attempt to murder Corporal Davis, all of it recorded, all of it admissible in court. That's illegal. You can't record without consent. I can when I have a federal warrant authorizing surveillance of suspected espionage activities. That warrant was issued 3 months ago when we first confirmed that the leak was coming from Fort Bragg. It covers all electronic monitoring necessary to the investigation, including this conversation. Cade's resistance collapsed. The legal implications of what she just revealed meant his options had shrunk to zero. There would be no explaining away the evidence, no creating alternative narratives, no eliminating witnesses. It was over. Davis, Murphy, Thompson, Thea said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just prevented a murder and exposed a traitor. I need you to secure Staff Sergeant Cade and contact Colonel Matthews immediately. Tell her the situation is contained and request military police presence at this location. Yes, ma'am. Davis pulled zip ties from his tactical vest, the same ties used for securing detainees in combat zones, the same ties that would now secure one of their own. He approached Cade with a mixture of anger and sadness, anger at the betrayal, sadness at what it meant for everything they'd believed about their unit. Ma'am, Thompson said, his hands shaking as he reached for his radio. What about us? We followed his orders. We came here intending to... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice what they'd been prepared to do. You came here because your NCO told you there was a threat to national security. When you realized the truth, you made the right choice. That's what matters. Thompson keyed his radio, but only static answered. The jamming equipment Cade had activated still functioning, still cutting them off from outside communication. Ma'am, the comms are jammed. We can't contact anyone. Thea examined Cade's jamming equipment, identifying the power source and control circuits within seconds. She shorted out the primary processing unit with a technique that suggested extensive familiarity with electronic warfare systems. The kind of familiarity that came from training with people who built these devices, who knew their vulnerabilities as well as their capabilities. Communications restored. Make the call. Thompson keyed his radio immediately, his voice tight with tension that came from realizing how close they'd come to crossing a line they could never uncross. Colonel Matthews, this is Private Thompson. We have a situation at the supply building that requires immediate command presence. Staff Sergeant Cade is down, disarmed and secured. The federal evaluator is in control of the situation. Static crackled for a moment, then Matthews' voice, tight with its own tension. Say again, Private. Staff Sergeant Cade is secured, ma'am. Captain Blackwell says the situation is contained, requesting military police and your presence. A pause, long enough for Matthews to process what she was hearing, to understand that her worst fears had been confirmed, that one of her trusted NCOs had indeed been the leak, had indeed tried to eliminate a federal agent, had indeed brought 3 soldiers to the edge of committing murder. All units converge on the supply building. MPs take point. I want that location locked down in 3 minutes. Nobody enters or leaves until I arrive. Thea released Cade's arm and stepped back, allowing Davis to complete the restraint process. Cade lay still, his face pressed against the concrete, his career and freedom evaporating with each passing second, each breath carrying the weight of choices that could never be unmade. You have no idea what you've done, he said, his voice muffled by the floor. The people I work for don't forgive failure. They don't leave loose ends. Your handlers have bigger problems than you right now. The same warrant that authorized my surveillance also authorized monitoring of their communications. They've been under observation for months. Every contact, every transaction, every instruction they've given you. They'll disappear, they always do. Not this time. This time we have names, locations, financial records, and a cooperative witness who's going to tell us everything he knows in exchange for a slightly shorter prison sentence. Cade laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. You think I'm going to cooperate? I think you're going to realize that your only chance of surviving federal prison is to make yourself valuable enough that the government has an interest in keeping you alive. Your handlers have a history of eliminating people who might testify against them. Your only protection is becoming more valuable to us than you are dangerous to them. The logic was inescapable. Kate had spent years learning to calculate risk and reward, to assess situations and choose the path of greatest survival. Now that calculation pointed in only one direction. Cooperation was his only play, his only chance. What do you want to know? Everything, starting with who recruited you and ending with every piece of information you've ever transmitted. Names, dates, methods, contacts, all of it. That could take days. Then we'd better get started. The supply building door burst open. Military police swept the room with weapons raised, securing the perimeter before Colonel Matthews entered. She took in the scene with a quick assessment that came from decades of command. Cade zip-tied on the floor, 3 soldiers standing at attention with expressions that mixed shame and relief, and Thea Blackwell standing calm and composed in the center of it all. Captain Blackwell, status report. Staff Sergeant Cade attempted to neutralize me after I confronted him about his espionage activities. He brought 3 soldiers as backup, but they chose to stand down when they realized the nature of the situation. Matthews looked at Cade secured on the floor, then at the 3 soldiers standing uncertainly nearby, the weight of command decisions pressing down on her shoulders. These men were involved. These men were manipulated by someone they trusted. They followed orders until those orders conflicted with their oath to the Constitution. Then they made the right choice. That's not how military justice works, Captain. Following illegal orders isn't an excuse. No, but recognizing illegal orders and refusing to comply is exactly what we train soldiers to do. These 3 did that. Eventually, that should count for something. Davis stepped forward, accepting responsibility the way soldiers were taught to accept it, taking ownership of failures as completely as they claim credit for successes. Ma'am, Captain Blackwell is being generous. We should have questioned Staff Sergeant Cade's orders from the beginning. We didn't because we trusted him. That's on us. Matthews considered the situation. 3 soldiers caught between competing loyalties, a traitor exposed, a federal investigation that would generate paperwork and scrutiny for months. The easy choice would be to throw the book at everyone. The hard choice would be to recognize the complexity and respond with wisdom rather than anger. This will go to JAG for review, she said finally. Until then, you 3 are confined to quarters pending investigation. Understood? Yes, ma'am. All 3 soldiers answered in unison, accepting their fate with the discipline their training had instilled, knowing they'd gotten off lighter than they deserved, knowing that Captain Blackwell had just saved their careers along with their lives. What about Cade? Matthews asked Thea. Federal custody. DIA has a detention facility prepared for high-value intelligence sources. He'll be interrogated by people with more expertise in extracting information than I have. And my command? This happened on my watch. Matthews' voice carried the weight of fear. Fear that her career was potentially destroyed by a failure she hadn't known existed. Fear that everything she'd built over 23 years would be reduced to a footnote about the installation that harbored a traitor. Colonel Matthews, you inherited a security problem that predated your command. You cooperated fully with a federal investigation once you became aware of it, and you made the difficult choice to trust my judgment when everything in your training told you not to. Thea's voice softened slightly, not quite sympathetic, but understanding the burden of command in ways that suggested she'd carried it herself. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to make you understand that blame will be assigned based on evidence, not assumptions. The evidence shows that Cade operated with sophisticated tradecraft specifically designed to avoid detection by his chain of command. You couldn't have known. I should have known. That's my job. Your job is to train soldiers and execute missions. Counterintelligence is someone else's job. The failure here belongs to the systems that should have caught Cade years ago, not to commanders who trusted those systems. Matthews nodded slowly, accepting the assessment without fully believing it. The investigation would determine her fate. Until then, all she could do was cooperate and hope. What happens now? Now I complete my report and coordinate with Director Ashford. Cade will be transported to federal custody within the hour. Your base will undergo enhanced security screening to ensure there are no additional leaks, and life at Fort Bragg will return to something resembling normal. Nothing about this is normal. No, but it's necessary. The information Cade sold got people killed. Good people. Patriots who trusted that their own military wouldn't betray them. This is how we honor their sacrifice. The sound of rotor blades cut through the air, growing louder. A Black Hawk helicopter descending toward the training yard. No unit markings, no identifying insignia, just flat black paint that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Matthews watched through the supply building window. I didn't authorize any aircraft. You didn't need to, Colonel. This authorization came from considerably above your level. The helicopter touched down. Its door opened before the rotors stopped spinning. A man in civilian clothes emerged, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority that didn't require uniforms or titles. Mid-60s, gray hair cut military short, eyes that had seen things most people only read about in classified reports. Director William Ashford, DIA, the man who had sent Thea to Fort Bragg, the man who coordinated operations that didn't officially exist. He approached the supply building with Colonel Jack Brennan beside him. Brennan moved slower than Ashford, the stiffness in his gait suggesting old injuries that never fully healed. But his eyes were sharp, taking in details, cataloging threats, still thinking like the operator he'd been 4 decades ago. Sparrow, Ashford said, using Thea's call sign, the name that appeared in classified reports instead of her real identity. Good work. Thank you, Director. Cade is secured and ready for transport. He's agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration at sentencing. Excellent. The intelligence value of a cooperative source will offset the embarrassment of losing an asset we should have caught years ago. Brennan stepped forward, his eyes finding Thea's, recognition passing between them that went beyond professional courtesy. He'd been her instructor 6 years ago, had trained her in advanced tactics at the course that produced the military's elite intelligence operators, had recognized her potential when she was still a lieutenant, wondering if she belonged in this world. Captain Blackwell, he said, formal in front of the other officers, but his eyes showed pride. Outstanding operational execution. Your assessment was correct, the threat was real, and your response was appropriate. Thank you, Colonel Brennan. Your training made the difference. Brennan allowed himself a small smile. I provided the foundation. You built the house. Matthews processed the exchange, understanding now that this had been planned at levels she couldn't access, that Thea's appearance at Fort Bragg hadn't been random, that powerful people had been watching her installation for months, waiting for the right moment to act. Captain Blackwell, Matthews said carefully, who exactly do you work for? Ashford answered before Thea could respond. Captain Blackwell works for the Defense Intelligence Agency, Colonel, but her operational authority comes from the National Security Council. She reports directly to people whose names you don't have clearance to know. He let that sink in for a moment. And I'm someone who doesn't exist, Colonel. Someone whose conversation with you never happened. Someone who will be very grateful if you demonstrate the discretion that your security clearance requires. The implicit threat was unmistakable. Matthews had stumbled into a world where normal rules didn't apply, where careers could be ended with a phone call, where the wrong question could have permanent consequences. I understand. Good. Then you understand that this incident will be recorded as a training exercise that identified a security vulnerability. Staff Sergeant Cade will be listed as having resigned for personal reasons. No federal investigation will appear in any official record, and Captain Blackwell was never here. Sir, with respect, there are witnesses. 156 soldiers saw what happened today. 156 soldiers participated in a realistic training scenario that tested their responses to unexpected situations. That's the story they'll tell their families, their friends, anyone who asks, because that's the only story that exists. Brennan touched Matthew's arm gently, the gesture of a senior officer who understood the burden of keeping secrets that wanted to be told. Colonel, I know this is difficult. The truth wants to come out. What happened today deserves recognition, but some truths are more dangerous when exposed. Cade's handlers have resources in reach that extend into places you can't imagine. If they learn the real details of how he was caught, they'll adapt, they'll improve, and the next traitor will be harder to find. Matthews looked at the helicopter, at Ashford, at Brennan, at Thea, understanding that she was being given an order disguised as advice, understanding that cooperation was her only real option. What about the 3 soldiers Cade tried to recruit? Davis, Murphy, Thompson? They'll be reassigned to units where their skills can be better utilized, Ashford said. Their records will reflect exemplary service with no mention of today's events. They made the right choice when it mattered. That choice will be rewarded. And Sergeant Hargrove? He's going to have questions about why his authority was challenged by someone who turned out to be exactly what she claimed to be. Thea spoke for the first time since Ashford arrived. Sergeant Hargrove needs to understand that his assumptions almost prevented a federal investigation from succeeding. If he'd been less focused on establishing dominance and more focused on assessing the actual situation, this morning could have gone very differently. Should I counsel him? You should do whatever you think will make him a better leader, but I'd suggest emphasizing that the most dangerous opponents often look the least threatening. That's a lesson worth learning, even if the circumstances were unusual. Ashford checked his watch. The gesture of a man operating on schedules measured in minutes rather than hours. Sparrow, we need to move. The debrief team is waiting in Stuttgart, and there's another situation developing that requires your particular skills. Thea's expression sharpened. Volkov? The transmission from Cade triggered responses from the network. We've identified movement in Germany. Volkov is preparing to execute whatever he's been planning. We need you there before he goes operational. Brennan's face went pale at the name. Yuri Volkov, the ghost that had haunted him for 40 years. The KGB officer who had run illegals into American military installations during the Cold War, who had sworn revenge when Brennan dismantled most of his network in the late 80s, who should have died in a dozen different operations, but somehow always survived. Volkov is in Germany? Brennan's voice carried decades of hatred. Are we certain? Signals intelligence puts him in Stuttgart, coordinating with assets we believe include Secret Service personnel assigned to protect the president's daughter during her visit next week. The words hit like hammer blows. Emma Richardson, 22 years old, visiting military installations in Germany as part of a goodwill tour, protected by Secret Service agents who were supposed to be incorruptible, who were supposed to be the last line of defense. He's going after Emma, Thea said. Not a question, a statement of tactical assessment. Kidnapping, not assassination. He wants leverage. That's our assessment. Marcus Webb is the primary asset. Secret Service supervisor, 22 years of service. Recruited by the network 3 years ago through gambling debts. Ashford pulled up a photo on his tablet. Graying hair, tired eyes. The face of a man who had made choices he couldn't unmake. There are at least 2 others in the protection detail. We haven't identified them yet, but Cade's cooperation should give us the information we need. I'm going, Brennan said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 4 decades earning the right to make that call. Volkov and I have unfinished business. Colonel, Ashford said carefully, with respect, this is a young person's operation. Fast movement, close combat, technical surveillance. You've been retired from active operations for 6 years. I've been hunting Volkov for 40 years. I know how he thinks, how he plans, how he'll try to escape when things go wrong. Captain Blackwell is the best operator you have, but she didn't live through the Cold War. She doesn't know what men like Volkov are capable of. Thea met Brennan's eyes, reading the need there, the decades of frustration, the personal investment in stopping a man who had killed people Brennan had trained, had loved, had promised to protect. "Director," she said, "Colonel Brennan trained me. He knows my capabilities, and he's right. His knowledge of Volkov's methods could be the difference between success and failure." Ashford considered this, weighing operational security against tactical advantage, weighing the risk of bringing a 68-year-old retired officer into an active operation against the value of his experience. "He comes as advisor only, not active operations, understood?" "Understood," Brennan said, but his eyes told a different story. Told a story about a man who had no intention of staying on the sidelines when the moment came. "Then we move now. Wheels up in 10 minutes. The Black Hawk lifted off with Thea and Brennan aboard, Cade secured in the cargo area under guard. Below them, Fort Bragg shrank to a collection of buildings surrounded by pine trees. 156 soldiers resumed their training, carrying new understanding about the nature of strength and the cost of assumptions. The flight to Germany took 14 hours, refueling stops in Canada and Iceland, time compressed into the endless drone of engines and the cramped space of military transport. Thea used the time to sleep in the way soldiers learned to sleep, taking rest wherever it was available, storing energy for the moment when it would be needed. Brennan sat awake, watching the ocean pass beneath them, thinking about Berlin, about Prague, about all the operations that had tried and failed to catch Yuri Volkov, about the agents who had died because Volkov was always 3 steps ahead, always anticipating, always escaping. "Captain," he said finally, speaking into the darkness of the cargo hold, "tell me about Kandahar." Thea opened her eyes, considering how much to reveal, how much Brennan needed to know about the night that had earned her the call sign Sparrow, the night that proved she belonged in this world. "What do you want to know?" Riker said 12 kills in 8 minutes, all headshots, in the dark. That's not luck. That's not even exceptional skill. That's something else. It was desperation. Riker's team was going to die. I couldn't let that happen. "But how did you do it?" Thea was quiet for a long moment, remembering the compound, the darkness, the absolute certainty that if she failed, 3 American soldiers would be executed by the Taliban, and nobody would ever know why. "I stopped thinking, stopped planning, just moved, trusted the training, trusted my instincts, let my body do what it had been taught to do." "That's the secret," Brennan said softly, "the thing I tried to teach everyone. You can't think your way through combat. You have to become combat, have to let it flow through you instead of trying to control it. You taught me that. Advanced Tactics course. 6 years ago, you said the best operators are the ones who can turn off their conscious mind and let their training take over. And you listened. Most people can't do it. They try to maintain control, try to stay rational, but combat isn't rational. It's chaos, and you have to match chaos with chaos." The helicopter engines changed pitch, beginning the descent toward Ramstein Air Base, Germany visible through the small windows. Green fields and ancient forests, cities that had stood for 1,000 years. And somewhere among those cities, Yuri Volkov prepared to kidnap an American president's daughter. "When we find him," Thea said, "what are you going to do?" Brennan didn't answer immediately. The question cut to the heart of why he'd insisted on coming, why he couldn't let someone else finish this, why 40 years of hunting required personal closure. "I'm going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." "That's not an answer, Colonel." "It's the only answer I have." They landed at Ramstein and transferred immediately to a civilian vehicle. No military markings, no official presence, just 2 people in business casual clothes who could have been consultants or salespeople or tourists, anything except what they actually were. Colonel Jennifer Harper met them at Stuttgart Military Community Headquarters, sharp-eyed and sharp-minded, the kind of officer who saw patterns others missed, who asked questions that made people uncomfortable. Captain Blackwell, Colonel Brennan, welcome to Stuttgart. She led them to a secure briefing room. Screens on the walls showing surveillance footage, communications intercepts, movement patterns of the Secret Service detail assigned to protect Emma Richardson. We've identified the three compromised agents, Marcus Webb, James Cordell, and Diana Vasquez. All three have been with the service for over 15 years. All three were recruited within the past 3 years through different vulnerabilities. Harper pulled up their files. Photos and service records that painted pictures of dedicated professionals who had made choices that would define the rest of their lives. Webb has gambling debts. Cordell was having an affair that the network threatened to expose. Vasquez's daughter has medical bills that insurance won't cover. Classic recruitment tactics, Brennan said. Find the pressure point and apply force until they break. The attack is scheduled for tomorrow. Emma Richardson visits the military hospital at 0900 hours. The hospital has been secured, routes planned, contingencies established. But somewhere in that security architecture is a gap that will allow a kidnapping team to reach her. Thea studied the hospital layout. Emergency exits, service corridors, vehicle access points, looking for the vulnerability that Volkov would exploit. The gap that would open just long enough for his people to strike. Here, she said, pointing to a service corridor that connected the main hospital to a loading dock. No cameras, minimal foot traffic, direct vehicle access from a side street that's not on the official route. If I were planning this, that's where I'd create the breach. Harper looked at the corridor, understanding immediately. Cordell controls communications for the facility. He could create a dead zone, make it look like equipment malfunction. By the time anyone realizes something's wrong, the kidnapping team would already have Emma. And Webb controls vehicle positioning, Brennan added. He could ensure that response teams are too far away to intercept, that the kidnapping vehicle has a clear escape route. What about Vasquez? Inside the protective bubble, right next to Emma, the person who's supposed to shield her with their own body. Instead, she'll be the one who guides Emma exactly where the kidnappers need her to be. The pieces fit together with the terrible logic of a well-planned operation. 3 assets working in coordination, each creating a small gap in security that individually seemed insignificant. But together, those gaps formed a corridor of vulnerability that would allow trained operators to reach the president's daughter. We arrest them now, Harper said, before they can execute. No, Thea said. If we arrest them, Volkov aborts, goes underground, starts planning the next operation. We need to catch him in the act, need evidence that will expose the entire network. You're suggesting we let the attack proceed? I'm suggesting we let them think it's proceeding. We replace Vasquez with someone we control. We monitor Cordell's communications. We track Webb's movements. And when Volkov's team makes their move, we're ready. Brennan smiled, a cold expression that held no warmth. You're using Emma as bait. I'm using the appearance of Emma as bait. The real Emma will be somewhere safe. The woman they try to kidnap will be a trained federal agent who knows exactly what's coming. That's you, Harper said, understanding the plan. You're going to pose as Emma Richardson. I'm 5'6". She's 5'5". Similar build, similar coloring. With the right clothes and styling, I can pass for her at a distance. Volkov's team won't know the difference until it's too late. And when they try to grab you? Thea's smile matched Brennan's. Then we find out exactly where Volkov is watching from. Because a man like him won't delegate this operation. He'll want to see it succeed. We'll want to watch the moment when America's vulnerability is exposed. He'll be close, Brennan said. Line of sight to the hospital. Somewhere he can observe and escape quickly if needed. Probably an apartment building or office complex within 600 meters. We scan for thermal signatures, communications equipment, anything that suggests a command and control position. Harper pulled up satellite imagery of the area surrounding the hospital. Dozens of buildings within the search radius, thousands of windows, hundreds of potential observation points. This is a needle in a haystack. No, Brennan said. It's a game Volkov has played for 40 years, and I know his patterns. I know how he thinks. He pointed to a building 600 meters north of the hospital. There, fourth floor, corner apartment with windows facing both the hospital entrance and the service corridor. High enough for clear line of sight, low enough for quick escape, multiple exit routes. Civilian building that won't trigger security sweeps. You can't be certain. I've chased him through a dozen countries, missed him by minutes in Prague, by hours in Istanbul. I know how he selects positions. This is where he'll be. Thea studied the building, running probability calculations, weighing tactical advantages against risks, making the kind of decision that separated exceptional operators from merely good ones. Then that's where I'm going, after I let them think they've got me. The morning of Emma Richardson's hospital visit arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed inappropriate for the danger it concealed. Bright sun, clear skies, the kind of day when nothing bad should happen, when the world should be safe and simple. But the world was never simple. And safety was an illusion maintained by people like Thea Blackwell, who stood in dark places so others could live in light. She stood in the hospital's private entrance, wearing clothes identical to what Emma Richardson would wear. Dark blazer, white blouse, American flag pin on the lapel, hair styled in the same way Emma wore hers, makeup applied to match publicity photos. From 60 feet away, she could pass for the president's daughter. From 6 feet away, the deception would be obvious. But 6 feet was closer than Volkov's kidnapping team would get before Thea acted. Brennan watched from a nearby office, monitoring communications, tracking movements, coordinating with the rapid response teams positioned throughout the area, doing the job of a much younger man while carrying the accumulated wisdom of 40 years. Sparrow, we have movement. Black SUV approaching from the east. 2 occupants visible. Copy. What about our 3 assets? Cordell just created a communications gap in the service corridor, exactly as predicted. Webb has positioned response vehicles 3 minutes away instead of the standard 90 seconds. Vasquez is guiding you toward the corridor. The woman posing as Vasquez was actually a DIA operator named Catherine Ross, 38 years old, 15 years of experience in protective operations, and absolutely committed to making sure this operation succeeded. Ma'am, Ross said, playing her role perfectly, I'd like to take you through the service corridor. It's more private, fewer people. Of course, Thea said, modulating her voice to match Emma Richardson's vocal patterns, playing the part completely. They walked toward the corridor, toward the gap in security, toward the moment when Volkov's team would strike. The SUV pulled up to the loading dock. 2 men exited, both wearing maintenance uniforms, both moving with the practiced efficiency that suggested military training. Special operations background, men who had done this before. Thea's hand moved to her concealed weapon, a HKUSP compact chambered in 9mm, 13 rounds, more than enough for 2 targets at close range. The men entered the corridor, saw their target walking toward them. The president's daughter, apparently unprotected, apparently vulnerable. The opportunity they'd been planning for months finally presenting itself. They reached for her, hands grabbing for her arms, intending to pull her toward the vehicle, to inject the sedative that would make her compliant, to complete the kidnapping before anyone realized what had happened. Thea moved. Not the explosive combat she'd used against Cade, something different, something more controlled. She let them grab her, let them think they'd succeeded, let them start to relax. Then she broke the grips with techniques that came from a lifetime of training, struck nerve clusters that made hands go numb, swept legs that put both men on the ground before their brains processed what was happening. Ross had her weapon out, covering the fallen men while Thea secured them with zip ties. Targets secured, 2 hostiles down, no shots fired. Brennan's voice came through her earpiece. Urgent, excited. Sparrow, we have thermal signature at the target building. 4th floor, corner apartment, 3 occupants. Communications equipment consistent with command and control. Is one of them Volkov? Can't confirm visually, but the operational pattern matches. Thea looked at Ross. Can you handle this? Go. We've got this. Thea ran. Not toward safety, not toward backup, toward the building where Yuri Volkov waited, where 40 years of pursuit would finally end, where the ghost of the Cold War would be captured or escape one final time. 600 meters. She covered it in less than 3 minutes, running with the same controlled speed she'd shown on the PT test at Fort Bragg, the same efficiency, the same absolute commitment to the mission. The building was old. Communist-era construction that had survived reunification and decades of renovation. Concrete stairs, narrow hallways, the smell of cooking and age. 4th floor. She cleared the stairwell, weapon drawn, every sense heightened to combat awareness. This was the moment, the confrontation that would determine whether months of investigation ended with justice or frustration. Apartment 4C, corner unit. She could hear voices inside, Russian, agitated. They knew something had gone wrong, knew their kidnapping team had failed, but they didn't know she was coming. Thea kicked the door. The old lock shattered under the impact. She entered fast, weapon up, scanning for targets. 3 men, 2 reaching for weapons, 1 standing calmly in the corner, watching her with eyes that held no fear. She fired twice. Both armed men dropped. Clean chest shots, center mass, the training taking over, the muscle memory executing what her conscious mind had barely registered. The 3rd man stood motionless, hands visible, no weapon, just an old man in expensive clothes who looked at her with something that might have been respect. Captain Blackwell, the famous Sparrow, 12 kills in Kandahar, impressive. His English carried a Russian accent, cultured, educated, the voice of a man who had spent decades learning to blend into any environment, to become whoever he needed to be. Yuri Volkov, KGB Director at S. You've been running sleeper agents in the U.S. military for 40 years. And you've been hunting them for what, 6 years? You're just a child playing in a world you don't understand. I'm the child who just dismantled your entire network. Kate is in custody. Your 3 Secret Service agents are being arrested as we speak, and your kidnapping team is in German custody. Volkov smiled, then reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Captain, I wouldn't. He pulled out a phone, screen showing a timer. Dead man's switch. If my heart stops, or if I don't check in every 6 hours, encrypted files containing every American asset in Eastern Europe get released to Russian intelligence. 73 names, 73 lives. Thea's blood ran cold. You're bluffing. Am I? Your Damascus ambush wasn't random. I gave Cade the intelligence to pass along. I wanted to see if you were as good as they said. You survived. Impressive. But those 73 won't survive if you pull that trigger. The door burst open behind her. Brennan rushed in, weapon drawn, eyes finding Volkov across the room. 40 years of hunting condensed into this single moment. Captain, don't! Brennan's voice carried desperation. He's serious. We've been tracking those files for 2 years. We need him alive to decrypt them. Thea's finger rested on the trigger. Memories flooding through her mind. Damascus, the ambush that had nearly killed her. The agents who had died because of this man's network. The soldiers who had been betrayed. But killing him would doom 73 more. I know you want to pull that trigger, Brennan said. God knows I wanted to for 40 years. But you're not an executioner. You're an officer. The best officer I ever trained. Don't let him take that from you. Thea's hand steadied, the weapon still aimed at Volkov's center mass. The shot, clear, easy, but not justified. Not if it meant 73 deaths. You're right, she said quietly. Volkov laughed, a sound like ice cracking. See, Jack? Still soft after all these years. Thea shot. Not at Volkov, at the phone in his hand. The device shattered, fragments of glass and circuit boards scattering across the floor. The dead man's switch destroyed before he could activate it. I'm not soft, Thea said, her weapon still trained on him. I'm smart. That switch was a bluff. DIA cracked your encryption 3 months ago. We've already extracted those 73 assets. They're safe. You have nothing left to bargain with except your knowledge. And you're going to give us every bit of it in federal supermax. Volkov's smile finally died. For the first time in 40 years, Yuri Volkov looked afraid. You couldn't have. We did, and you're done. German federal police swarmed the building within minutes, taking Volkov into custody, securing the scene, beginning the process that would end with him in an American prison cell, where he would never see daylight again. Brennan stood beside Thea in the apartment, looking at the man he'd hunted for 4 decades, finally caught, finally defeated. It's over, he said quietly. No, sir, it's just beginning. Volkov will cooperate. He'll give us names, locations, the entire network that supported him. This is bigger than just catching one man. This is dismantling an infrastructure that's been active since the Cold War. I meant for me, I can finally rest. The mission is complete. 2 weeks later, Thea stood in the White House East Room, sunlight streaming through tall windows. The President of the United States standing before her with a medal in his hands. Captain Thea Blackwell, for extraordinary heroism in the conduct of counterintelligence operations that prevented the kidnapping of a U.S. citizen and exposed an espionage network that had operated for 40 years. The Defense Distinguished Service Medal. The President pinned the medal to her uniform. The gathered crowd applauded. Military brass, intelligence community leadership. The people who knew what she'd done, even if they could never speak of it publicly. Emma Richardson stood in the front row, 22 years old, alive because Thea had stood in her place, had taken the risk that should have been hers. She smiled at Thea with tears in her eyes, understanding what had been prevented, what her life would have been if the kidnapping had succeeded. After the ceremony, Brennan found Thea in a quiet corridor. I'm retiring, Captain. 45 years is enough. He pulled out a worn leather notebook filled with decades of handwritten notes. Everything I know, pass it on someday to someone worthy. Thea took the notebook with both hands, feeling the weight of accumulated wisdom. I will, sir. I promise. That evening, Thea called her mother. Elizabeth Blackwell answered on the first ring. I'm okay, Mom. I can't tell you details, but I'm okay. Your father did dangerous things too, honey. Just keep coming home. I promise. 1 week later at Fort Bragg, Master Sergeant Hargrove addressed his formation. Captain Blackwell taught me that true warriors don't announce themselves. Their actions speak louder than any words. Never underestimate the quiet ones. After the dismissal, Riker approached Thea. Ma'am, in Kandahar you said the quiet ones carry the weight. I'll never forget that. Thea looked out at the training grounds where new warriors were being forged. Somewhere new threats were forming, new enemies planning, new shadows gathering. But that was okay. That was the calling. The quiet ones would be ready, would be watching, would be standing in dark places so others could live in light. They might just be the ones who carry everyone home.